All right, here we go. So we had some really good requests for a JavaScript sort of hello world with VS Code and some Git cloning. So I'm going to show both of those. So I'm going to start with, with VS Code, there's a bunch of ways you can open VS Code. You can open it from the command line. You can do whatever you want. But, you know, honestly, however you open a program on your computer the normal way is how I do it. On a Mac, if you're not familiar, that's command space for the search bar. I'm sure Windows has an equivalent. If you're not familiar with this kind of layout, these are, well, they're like browser tabs, but it's different files. Except with VS Code, you sort of have a bit of an interface here as well. And they're showing us some release notes with the new changes to VS Code that I'm sure are really exciting. What you're usually going to want to do with VS Code, at least the first time you open it, is you're going to want to open it to a certain directory. I would just go to File and Open. Yes.
I have a question. So can you
absolutely
maybe spend another minute describing best practices for directory structure? Because there's, do you put this as a subordinate underneath your username? Do you put it under the root? Do you put it under a documents folder? What's the best way to do that, please? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Actually, that's where I was about to go. Okay, sorry. No problem at all. I'm really glad you asked. And yeah, what Jim is asking about, folks, is like, just how do I keep all the code that I'm about to be writing for the next 15 weeks organized in my file structure? And let me go ahead and kind of play around with opening different folders in VS Code to demonstrate this. So when you go to File and Open in VS Code, you see a modal window that you're probably pretty familiar with, where you can open, all sorts of different kinds of things. Just for the fun of it, this is not how you would do it, but I'm just gonna open like the root Macintosh directory of the whole computer. And you should never ever do this, but I just want to visually demonstrate like the way that files and directories are organized. And so a directory is just a fancy word for, like, we usually call it a folder. Directory is the older term. You think of like the phone book as a directory, because again, all of these technologies were created in the 70s. And as you'll note, there's one directory here, the root of the tree. And its name is /. And then there are all these other directories. This is the whole file system for the computer. And we usually don't see this as normal everyday users. And again, that's one of the cool parts of becoming a programmer. We get to poke under the hood. The way that most operating systems that you're gonna ever interact with are organized is that within this root directory, there is a directory called users. And these are all the user accounts that exist on this computer. And this should ring a bell, because if I go to System Preferences on my Mac and I go to Accounts, Users and Groups, I can find the different users and I can add a user, and you can log out of a user, actually, which I was about to do, but won't, because that would actually quit me out of Zoom. And I'm sure everyone, you've seen a computer where you can choose one of multiple accounts to log into. And under the hood, every user account inside this users directory, or something similarly named, has its own directory named for that user. And Adam C is my little nickname for myself, because CEE is a phonetic spelling of C for Kahan, my last name. And this is what's called my home directory. When you log into your account, this is where you start, whether it's through the graphic user interface in Windows or on the command line. And this is a better place to open up Visual Studio Code. I goofed there. Let me go ahead and So this is what's called my home directory. And to demonstrate it with a terminal program, again, you could use, I often use iTerm, but if you're on a Mac, you could use terminal. The great thing is if you do CD and enter, you always go home. And then you can see all the different things in your home directory. And let me just show my home directory from the perspective that we're all used to seeing, which is one of these sort of more visual search tools. And it's a little, there we go. They just call it home on Mac. They sort of hide it a little bit. But this probably looks familiar to everyone in one form or another. I think you're used to seeing desktop, documents, downloads. Does this ring a bell to folks, this layout? Awesome. And in a terminal program, it's the same thing. Documents, downloads, desktop, applications. And again, it's just different ways of looking at the same thing. Downloads, documents, desktop, applications. And in VS Code, if I opened up the terminal here, it's the same thing. What VS Code will do is when I open VS Code to a certain folder, to a certain directory, when I then start a new terminal in VS Code, the terminal will be located in that directory. That's not quite the best way to describe it. Rather, you can navigate around directories in a terminal in a shell. And by default, it opens with us navigated to our home directory, which again has desktop and downloads and movies. And I'm going to use a terminal program called Touch, which creates an empty file. I'm going to call it helloworld.txt. And if I type this ls list command, I now see my helloworld.txt. There's also a terminal command called cat. Don't worry about memorizing all this stuff. No one memorizes it. You just kind of find cheat sheets online, and the more you use it, you get used to it. Cat prints out whatever's in a file, which is nothing right now. And just what I want to point out is that over here in the Finder, we've got my helloworld.txt. Because again, whether it's the Finder or the terminal in VS Code or the built-in terminal on the Mac, it's all different views of the same file system. And I can open this and I can type hello world and save it and quit it. And if I go to VS Code and I use the cat command to print out the contents of this file to the screen, I now see that change I just made. If I go in the File Explorer, I've got my Hello World file down here. I can open it up. And just like any other text editor, I can edit it. If you see funny stuff happening with my text editor here with the cursor, it is because I'm using there's a text editor called Vim that has a bunch of fancy keyboard commands that again kind of comes from the 70s, from a time when like you had to wait like a second between moving up and down. And it lets you do certain things like copy and paste text and undo with keyboard commands. And a lot of programmers use it, not everyone does. It's cool, it takes a while to learn. Visual Studio Code has like a Vim mode that you can use. We're not gonna worry about it too much in class. I just wanted to share that and let you know what was going on. That said, you can do all sorts of custom like color theming of your text editor for the way you want.
Like I can go here to preferences and I think even better than that. So Visual Studio Code has something amazing called Command P. Actually, Command Shift P is the command palette. And now I can go to preferences, color theme, and I can change it around. But I'm going to leave it as solarized. So that magic command there is Command Shift P. And that gives you all sorts of interesting commands. And as you type, it filters so you can kind of explore what's there. And I know I'm kind of taking the long road here, but to answer your question, Jim, about file structure, what I would recommend as something pretty simple is in your home directory on your computer, create a directory called code, and then we can put everything in there. You can do it this way if you want, you know, the way that you would create a new directory or folder using the Finder. You can do it here in the Explorer window if you want. I think I need to position it right. It might create this inside the other one, which is not what I want, but let's see. Yeah, it did.
I think part of my point was I know there's a million ways to skin the cat, and I didn't know if it was wisest to do code platoon week 1, day 1, code platoon week 2, day 2, or if we start off by, I didn't really know how our days or projects were going to be divided up and what would make the most sense.
For sure. Yeah, everyone, we talked about this a lot in the last cohort. Honestly, I think probably like week 1, day 1, day 2 will make the most sense. And let me demonstrate what that looks like now. And Francisco and Megan also would be good people to ask, because it does get a little tricky, to be honest. I know that different students would come up with different approaches. Just to kind of finish this walkthrough on demonstrate, you can like move directories around here. You can drag them to different places, though it does get a little annoying to try and drag it out to get it up to the top level. What I would recommend people start to do is to use the command line to get more comfortable with doing a lot of these things. And I'm going to demonstrate that now, and Jim, I'll kind of map out a little bit of what that looks like. And we will want to put this inside a Git repository, but we can cross that bridge later. So on the command line, you almost always want to start out by typing pwd print working directory. The working directory is the directory that our cursor is located in, for lack of a better word, where all our commands are being applied, the directory that we're working in. Because I'm always doing that to keep track of where I'm at. You can modify your command prompt to show that information, but I haven't done it. So I'm in my home directory. I can see I have all of these different directories here. I've got this code directory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bigger so people can see it more easily. I'm going to get rid of this other terminal so it's a little easier to read. So to kind of demonstrate what I recommend, I'm going to use the copy command. And on the command line, commands often have what are called flags after them, which is like another following command with a dash. This -r stands for recursive, which means we are going to copy everything inside this directory code. And something I want to point out is I just have to type C and O and tab, and I get auto completion, which is a huge help. And it doesn't really matter for a directory name if you have the slash at the end or not, I believe. And this might take a moment. I just copied everything from this code directory to a code backup directory. This might take a lot more than a moment because I have a lot in there.
let's see, there we go. So we finished. I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. I'm going to use ls to make sure that I'm seeing what I expect to see, which is great. I'm going to delete that code directory just so I can kind of walk through it and give you folks a clean setup. Again, I'm using flags here. This recursive one deletes all the directories inside the code directory, and F is for force. So this is a little dangerous to use when you use the rm command. If I just tried to delete the code directory, it would tell me, hey, this is a directory. I can't just delete a directory. I can delete a file, no problem. That file is now gone. If I look through here, I'm not going to see hello world. But to delete a directory, I need to use -r, and then the F is to avoid some pop-up messages. So just don't use rm-rf unless you know what you're doing. And this is going to take a minute too. And now, again, Jim, thank you for being patient. I know this was the really long-winded answer to your question. How would I organize my projects? I would go to my home directory, which again, you know, whatever your user account one is. I would create a directory. I would just maybe call it code, to be honest. You could also call it projects. I think code is good. On the command line, mkdir stands for make directory. So I've now created a new directory called code. I'm going to look inside it with the ls command. There's nothing there. I'm going to use the change directory to navigate into the code directory. There's nothing there. My command prompt has changed to show me I'm in the code directory. I'm going to make another directory inside that directory called week1. And then I'm going to make a directory inside the week1 directory called day1. And in fact, now if I kind of look over here, I can see I've got this code directory with week1 and day1. If I go to my Finder, this is my new code directory, week1, day1. There's nothing in it. Let's make a hello world program in JavaScript. I'm going to use this touch command, which creates a new directory. And I'm saying, hey, in the week1 directory, inside there in the day1 directory, let's make a hello world.js program. So you can also go to File, New File to do this. You can click inside here and do New File to do this. You definitely don't have to use the command line, and I'm not encouraging people to make your life more difficult. I would say give it a shot and see how it goes. And if it's really holding you up, don't worry about it too much and just do whatever is most natural. Because by the end of this class, we'll all have done a ton of stuff on the command line. I should actually pause here because I've covered a ton of ground, I know. And so how are people doing? How are people feeling? Do people have questions? Are people unsure of what the application of this is? Because I know this is part overview as well as kind of getting to stuff. So I just want to check in with the class and see how everyone's doing. Good. What's on people's minds?
This is probably down the road, but could you talk us through how we can push to our Git? So once we've actually written the code, I understand how to fork and pull it down. I'm having a little bit of trouble pushing it up.
Totally. Yeah, I'm going to get to that a bit later. I think I've ended up sort of just walking through command line stuff, but for sure. Is anyone feeling a little overwhelmed with the command line, or like this is a lot, or I'm not really sure what to do with this? And if so, that's really normal. I mean, this stuff takes a while, and to put it in perspective, I graduated from college in 2007. So I had like 4 years of undergrad doing this, and then about a decade of industry experience. is this command line stuff that's people like, oh, I know this, we don't need this is too slow. I just need to kind of get a read on where folks are at.
I'm on the this is overwhelming camp.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Ben, I appreciate you sharing that. I promise you, you are not alone. What are some of the overwhelming pieces?
That's just like, that's a lot of commands that I'm trying to like.
Yeah.
I basically had like a little crash course thing that was on like the pre-work on the command line, and that's a lot of things. I don't even know all the applications of everything that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Just I don't even know enough to know what I don't even know right now.
For sure, man. I feel you. And again, I promise you, you are not alone in that. Does anyone else kind of feel that same way? Like, I'm not sure what to know. This is like a lot of stuff.
I'm feeling that same way.
I couldn't see who that was in the Zoom, but yeah, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Yeah, again, it's always that's really normal. And I also want to emphasize, like, there's a pretty wide range of experiences in the class. So as the class goes on, that'll be the case, and that's okay too. Especially if this stuff is new to you, it is overwhelming. So I'll just wrap up with this command line stuff with two things. First of all, don't let worrying about the command line be a blocker. Don't be afraid to just file, open, file, new file, all the ways that you're used to doing it. They all work great. I know plenty of great software developers who they can use the command line, but they don't live in it or love it. And it's not a deal breaker. The other thing I'll say is by the end of this class, you will be way more comfortable because you'll have done a ton of it. The third thing is, honestly, right now, the most critical command line tool is really knowing where you are with this PWD command, knowing how to use the CD command to navigate, which we haven't talked a lot about, but I'll talk about later. And then, as we'll see with Hello World, knowing how to run a JavaScript program from the command line. So that's really it. And in fact, Adam,
I have a question. Would you prefer that we let the TAs help with questions, or if we feel comfortable helping with some of these, is it okay that we offer to help?
Oh yeah, I would say if you want to help folks, that would be awesome. I would say just, yeah, feel free to help. I think the golden rule of helping is as always, just to be patient. And I always struggle with this. I do throw a lot of information out there, and it's too much sometimes, to be honest. And I know that, like, when helping people, sometimes you just got to start with the basics. And as long as people are receptive to that, that would be amazing. Yeah. And thank you for asking. And I want to open up. I can't seem to get both of these tabs open at the moment, and that's fine. So on the command line, we're really talking about where am I? PWD, navigate back, CD, navigate home, navigate to file, or to directory. And what I'm about to show, run JS program. Very briefly on navigation, 2 dots moves you backwards. CD and the name of the directory path that you want to go to moves you there. Don't worry about that too much because you will get a ton of practice. So this was a very long introduction to a Hello World program, but in JavaScript, we use the console.log command, which is the long worded version of print something. VS Code has a lot of like default linting and editor stuff set up, which is great to help us make sure we have our parentheses right and everything. So I'm going to use the ls command to look at what files are in my working directory. Got hello world, and now if I run it, the command here is node, and we'll talk about what node is in a moment. But the main thing to know is node is the program, the tool that we use to run JavaScript on our computer outside of the browser in a server environment. And this was a bit of a journey to get here, but we have now written a JavaScript hello world and gone ahead and run it. And let me check in and see what questions people have about maybe the basic command of doing this. And can someone maybe give me like a quick rundown of what is node?
I expect it's an application processor or processes the code based on the file type.
It is not quite. In many cases, you would be right. With JavaScript, it's a little funny. So just very quickly, JavaScript was created to be run in the browser. Every browser has what's called a JavaScript console, where you can run JavaScript. Without going too much into programming languages, languages like JavaScript and Python have what are called, well, on JavaScript, it's called, I think, the JavaScript virtual machine. With a different programming language like Java or C, you'd call it like a compiler, the thing that like takes our text and turns it into assembly code, which is something very similar to binary, to something that the computer can understand. The computer can't understand this. It has to be converted into a format the computer can understand. Let's see what the exact verbiage is. JavaScript runtime, that's the other term. JavaScript runtime, sort of like a compiler and then a program executor built into one. Without going into it too much, basically someone took the JavaScript runtime that was in Chrome, ripped it out of the browser, and bundled it up into a program that we can use on the command line. So, excuse me. Node very specifically is a JavaScript runtime, and it can understand and execute JavaScript files. If you type it by itself, you get what's called a REPL, which stands for read, evaluate, print loop. It lets you type JavaScript, and then as soon as you hit enter, it runs it.
Quick clarification of just where my mind's trying to wrap around on Node.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much like say you're on Replit, you hit print, it's the same thing. So Node, you're trying to print whatever you typed in with your function, right? So if you're wanting to do, you type 8 so that it does that, the bottles of beer 8 times, you do node, and if you did your function correctly, it'll print all 8 or that whole of what to the output or to the terminal.
Yeah, you have the right idea. Let me add a little bit of language. So we've got a couple pieces here. We have a JavaScript file. And open it in text edit. Whenever we're talking about the code that like we humans see and source code, all we're talking about is a text file that has a particular file extension, this .js with the type of the file on it. But it's text, right? But a programming language is like a very particular, very mathematical kind of language. So like this text, we can't just be like, hi, how are you? Because then if we try to run this, actually, we can do this and we can see what happens, which I think will be interesting. So VS Code, at the end of the day, is a very fancy version of TextEdit or Microsoft Word or whatever. It's a text editor for looking at text documents. These text documents just happen to always be a programming language. Like we're not writing normal everyday human language, we're writing JavaScript or C. And so this text editor is telling us, hey, this stuff that I'm writing doesn't conform to the JavaScript language. It's not how it works. And a programming language is, in some mathematical linguistic sense that I don't fully understand, to be honest, in like French or Arabic or Japanese or Spanish, except very highly specialized and mathematical and not anything anyone would use to speak to each other. But it has a grammar, and this isn't it. And our text editor tells us that and gives us these red squigglies that are telling us, hey, if you try to run this as a JavaScript program, it's not going to work. Or we can go ahead and do that. We can use this program node, which is designed to read and interpret a JavaScript file and turn it into something our computer can understand, and then spit the output of our program back into the terminal. And we get an error, which probably does not surprise people. All this other stuff we don't really have to worry about. If I see an error message, what I really care about is a little bit of information about the error. The syntax is wrong. What line of code did it happen on? Line 7. So now I have this text file, but now this special language that I'm writing in is all correct, right? A command in the JavaScript language to print, a command in the JavaScript language to create a variable with a value, a command in the JavaScript language to print the value of that variable. When I run this program node, what I'm really doing is I'm saying, node, I'm going to feed you input. The input is going to be this other file. Node says, cool. Node expects this to be a text file with JavaScript in it, which is what this .js means. It looks at it because Node is a program written to interpret and execute JavaScript. It takes this human readable source code, turns it into binary, essentially, ones and zeros that we can't really understand, but the computer can. And the computer runs these commands. And then it returns some values based on this program back to our terminal, and our terminal prints them out. So we could do all sorts of stuff. Like we could try to talk to a database or talk to another program on my computer, or maybe make an HTTP request to try and talk on the internet. But what we really want to do right now is print stuff back to the console. And it looks like I forgot to save my file, which is also very common and a common error. And this big black dot indicates that I have not saved my file. And one of the great things about the command line is if you hit the up arrow, you get the last commands that you typed. And you can use the down arrow too. And that's a lifesaver. And so now when I run this command, node, this program meant to interpret JavaScript and turn it into something the computer can understand, successfully interprets it, passes commands to the computer, and then the computer prints this information back out to our terminal.
Adam,
and that's probably a good pausing point. Yeah, what's up?
So if you, I think the thrust of my question earlier was, if I go and click on file, and we have a chance to either load a, we can create a new file, we can open a workspace. How do, when we're adding projects to our, if we're going to store them on our computer and retrieve them later, should we be initialized? So should the 99 bottles of beer project be a workspace, or should it be a file?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And then also, when we initialize that file, how do we initialize as a JavaScript file and get the JavaScript code completion additional functionalities that,
yeah,
you know, because so that was more where I was going earlier. So sorry.
No. Those are both great questions. Let me quickly answer your second question, and we'll come back to the first one about managing multiple Git repositories. So, Jim, that's a really good question about how do we get these advantages of code completion, and if I hover over something, it tells me what it is in JavaScript, all this amazing stuff that Visual Studio Code does for us. And the answer is wonderfully simple. Visual Studio Code looks at the file extension. If I renamed this file to be helloworld.txt, we get none of that. And Visual Studio Code just looks at the file extension, the part after the dot, and uses that to determine how it should understand that file. If I changed this to be a Python file, helloworld.py, well, it's not, I probably don't have the right Python stuff installed with Visual Studio Code, to be honest, because Visual Studio Code comes with pretty much everything you need for JavaScript kind of ready to go. While with Python, I think we might have to install some extensions. But so for JavaScript, it's wonderfully and absurdly simple. And check out over here, we also have this menu where we can look at folders and directories and different files. Does that answer your question about the file extension and code completion?
Yes, it does.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and I'm gonna get, that's a really good question about multiple Git repositories. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. Let me just check in. Yeah.
But then could you also tell us how Git repositories relate to workspaces and files?
Totally, yeah. The short answer with workspaces, by the way, with VS Code is, I will be honest, I don't actually know what a VS Code workspace is. It is definitely something you can leverage and use, but you don't have to. We will be doing most of our work with simply files and directories. Visual Studio Code is pretty lightweight as programming text editors go. There are programming text editors called IDEs, or integrated development environments, where you kind of have to create a whole project. And there's a lot of sort of configuration files that live alongside your source code. And with VS Code and with JavaScript in general, you need very little of that. I suspect a workspace kind of gives you a little bit, but to be honest, we're not going to really use them that much in this class unless you want to. Before I dive into the Git and GitHub stuff, let me just check in and see what questions people have about running this Hello World JavaScript program on my computer from the command line. And let me just demonstrate, by the way, to emphasize, this is not unique to VS Code. I can go to my week 1, day 1 directory in my terminal, and I can run that Hello World program there too. So all of this command line terminal stuff is not something that is special about VS Code. VS Code, rather, for our convenience, has a terminal built into it.
I have a question, if you can hear me.
Yes.
So after you type in that node hello world.js, from earlier on, I don't know, before the breakout rooms happened, and one of you were showing the assignments, that like deaf grandma one that popped up. The instructions popped up for like a second. I haven't like looked at it since, but it was saying like once you type into the command line certain like if you type in lowercase, it's going to say can't hear you. If you type goodbye, it's going to say leaving so soon. So my question, I guess, from there is, once you type in this node hello world.js, are you able to speak to this program, or do you have to do something extra to be able to like do those extra inputs into the command line to have it spit out certain things?
Yeah, that is a great question. And just to rephrase your question, you're basically saying, hey, this program you wrote, it does some output, right? But what about input, which is what we need for the deaf grandma program assignment? And you're totally correct that we need to use something else to get input, that right now we're not doing anything for our program to receive input. The way that you receive input from the terminal is going to be a little different, whether we're using Python or JavaScript. The short answer, and we can look at this in a couple minutes, I think we should look at the Git stuff first, and then we'll come back. But the short answer is that with JavaScript and using node.js, using Node where we're running JavaScript on our computer, there are other programs that are already written that we can import into our program to interact with the terminal from our JavaScript program. And I actually don't remember them off the top of my head. And let's find something really simple that I can use. And the unfortunate truth is that with node.js, it is a little bit of a pain. Something like this is probably the easiest way to do it. This is going to raise a lot of questions. So I think, to be honest, I'll come back to it later. What I will say is that there's this phrase standard in and standard out. And what that does indicate is that standard in and standard out are standard ways of having a program send information to print to the console or receive information from the console. So with Node.js, there are some libraries, which is just the term for a program that someone else wrote that's like bundled up for us to use in our program. We will like import a library. We will use someone else's code that has done the heavy lifting of getting input from the command line. And we'll use that in our Node program. In Python, it's dramatically easier to just to demonstrate. Here's a Python program. I'm probably going to get the syntax wrong. So with Python, we can't use Node because Node is going to expect JavaScript. And we get this error says, hey, there is no JavaScript function called print. Something important to point out is that the different file extensions, .js, .py, means these are two different files, right? Hello world.js and hello world.py. Py is short for Python. JS is short for JavaScript. There is a Python runtime on the command line that we can use, just like how we would use Node for JavaScript. to interpret and execute our Python program. And I believe I have to look this up very quickly, which just goes to show that no one remembers all of this. And in fact, I'm just going to copy this and bring it in here, and we're going to paste it and rename it. And this just goes to echo what matters is understanding the code. And I would argue having nice variable names. And so with Python, okay, so actually we are getting some nice auto completion here. So if I hover over this function, this built-in Python function I'm calling called input, VS Code is giving us information about it. And again, we see that term standard input. And standard input, again, because it's so normal to need to send text to the terminal or receive text from the terminal program itself has, well, they call it standard input and output. And we're going to see lots of this where like programs are really designed to work together. And it's like a key and a lock. Like the key fits in the lock because they were designed to fit together. So the terminal program, the command line, the shell was designed for other programs to be able to pass input and output. And the channels that we do that in are called standard input and output. And we'll talk more about that later. But so one of the very nice things of Python versus JavaScript is the Python language itself has a built-in function to receive standard input from the terminal. JavaScript has nothing of the sort because JavaScript originated as a language to be run in the web browser. So this program is waiting for my input. And then when I hit enter, execution continues to the last line of the program, and then we're done. That was a really good question. I hope that digression was helpful. What else is on people's minds before I start talking about GitHub a bit and Git? And how are people doing, and do we need a break? Do we want a break?
So I have a question about on MacBook. It's hard for me to get to my like username home folder. So I can get there in the terminal and I can get there on Finder, but on Visual Studio Code, I'm having trouble getting there with the VSC like Explorer and saving files to it because I have been using just a folder on the desktop.
Yeah. What I would recommend doing is if you just go to File and Open, and then I think if you click here, there's a good chance your home folder will show up there.
Yeah,
and then you can open up it from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my home folder doesn't show up there. I don't know if it's like a hidden setting or something like that.
Yeah, it's annoying. Mac is a little weird. Do you get like users or Macintosh HD?
Okay. I'm sure I can figure it out.
Yeah, I do apologize because there is, let's see, locations, desktop. The Mac is always a little weird. I'm not gonna lie. Getting to the home folder can be a little funny because I have it here because it's like I've opened it recently. I would see if you can get to users or Macintosh HD and go from there.
Okay.
Worst case,
the question is
honestly,
how to get to home.
Yes. Just to make it visible.
I've been going Finder, Go, It seems like the short case is up arrow Command H.
Yeah, so I can do that. I just can't access it through VSC. And
Oh,
it's not a
that-
huge.
that's clever.
I'm sure I can figure it out.
Okay. But I missed who said that, but the other gentleman is correct. What you can do in VS Code is if you go File, Open, and then you do Command Shift H, for me, that then opens up the home directory.
I expect in the settings directory down in the bottom left of VS Code, there might be something that sets the user's root.
That's the issue we're seeing here is more of just how the Mac Finder user interface is designed, unfortunately. Because I've run into this before. Honestly, the other thing for now is I would say you could just create like a code directory off of your desktop directory for the moment.
Okay, that shortcut work though, I just have to, yeah, that's fine.
Awesome. Yeah.
Whoever
Settings can do a lot of stuff, but yeah, the main issue is the Finder is a little weird. It kind of tries to be a little too smart for its own good sometimes, and it doesn't let you directly find stuff. And I'm about to mute. Anthony, could you mute yourself actually? Thank you. There was some beautiful outdoor background noise, but it was a bit loud. Cool. How are people doing? Should we take a break before we dive into GitHub or keep rolling? What time is it? 3 o'clock. Break. Yeah, I would concur. Let's take a break. This is a lot of information. Let me stop the recording.